Hi friends, in this video we are going to cover the current affairs with regard to SEBI for the month of September 2018. So in the previous video we started our discussion on the current affairs and we have discussed most of the current affairs of the month of September. So in this video we are going to conclude our discussion. So let's start with the first topic for this particular video. SEBI seeks power to intercept calls message of serious economic offenders. So if you remember, a related news has already been covered in one of the previous months. So SEBI is again seeking the powers to intercept calls and messages with regard to serious economic offenders. So here this is the keyword, serious economic offenders, and the SEBI seeking power to intercept calls. So we must be aware that presently SEBI is not having such kinds of powers, and SEBI wants these powers to take different actions with regard to different malpractices in the securities market. Now this was suggested by a committee which was headed by former Law Secretary and Lok Sabha's ex-Secretary General, Mr. T.K. Vishwanathan. So this committee has suggested that SEBI should have direct power to intercept calls and electronic communication by ensuring proper checks and balances like some other regulatory agencies. So it says that some other regulatory agencies in India, they are having this kind of a power and there are proper checks and balances to ensure that this power is not misused, and SEBI must also be allowed this kind of a power so that it can intercept the calls and electronic communication. So this committee has made this recommendation considering the difficulty which is presently faced by SEBI with regard to investigation of serious cases, particularly those which are relating to insider trading and front running. So these are some of the cases in which the SEBI wants to investigate but is unable to do so because it does not have the necessary powers. So this is to bolster the SEBI's evidence gathering mechanism. So if the SEBI is allowed these kind of powers, SEBI can gather the evidences in a better way. So this kind of a power which can be given to SEBI, it is going to help the SEBI to intercept calls and to take action against those suspected of serious economic offenses like insider trading. Now if you talk about the meaning of these two terms, insider trading and front running, so I believe you must have heard about this one, insider trading, many a times, and you must be aware that this means that buying or selling of a security by someone who is having the internal information, who is having access to material, the information which can influence the price of the share, non-public, which is not available to general public. This information, if it is available to someone and if the person is misusing the information to make some money, this is termed as insider trading. Now when it comes to front running, this is the practice of a broker or a trader. Now what happens is the broker or a trader, it steps in front of large orders to gain an economic advantage. Now how this happens? Let's see this through an example. Now for example, a broker receives a request from a client to buy 5 lakh shares of a company, say XYZ Limited. So broker has to buy these shares on the behalf of his client. So what does the broker do? He holds the client's order until after personally executing an order for the same stock for his account. So he believes that if this order is going to be placed, this is going to increase the demand and the price of the shares. So what he does, he first buys the shares for himself and then buys the share for client. So now he has bought the shares at a lower price, and for the client he has bought the shares at a higher price. So this allows him to make a gain. So he has come in front of the order of the client, and this is termed as front running. So these are the two important economic offenses against which the SEBI wants to take action. Now if you talk about the power to intercept call records, now the SEBI currently has powers to seek call data records. So SEBI can seek the call data records, it cannot intercept itself, and it cannot be intercepted, but this record they can be seeked, and this will contain the list of people in touch with the caller. However, a few foreign regulators, so if you move towards the global practices, then the agencies which are comparable to SEBI in the global market space, they are having the powers to intercept calls, and this has helped in unearthing some of the biggest of the frauds which were taking place. And the phone tapping, it has helped these global foreign regulators to take some necessary actions. Now when it comes to India, some central law enforcement and regulatory agencies, they are authorized by the government. So there are some agencies which are authorized by the government, and this authorization is given under the provisions of Indian Telegraph Act to carry out call interception. So some agencies like Intelligence Bureau, Enforcement Directorate, CBDT or Central Board of Direct Taxes, Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, CBI, National Investigation Agency, and Research and Analysis Wing. So these are some of the agencies which are there in India, and they are having the powers to intercept the calls. So SEBI can also be given such kind of a powers, so it can also be on an equal platform with regard to the foreign regulators, and it can take necessary actions. Now next one is SEBI has the rights to regulate auditors for activities under its regulations. So I believe this is something which you guys must have also heard about in one of the previous news item in which we discussed in some of the other months. And SEBI has the right to regulate auditors. So this one has been a statement which has been made by the Corporate Affairs Secretary. So he is saying that SEBI is well within its rights to regulate the auditors with regard to activities under its regulations. So he says that SEBI can take the necessary actions to regulate the auditors. So his comments are coming after SEBI proposed stricter norms for fiduciaries. So this we have already discussed how SEBI was seeking separate powers with regard to regulate the different sets of fiduciaries which are influencing the securities market. So they include the chartered accountants, cost accountants, company secretaries, and the valuers in the securities market. So these are the guys who are preparing different sorts of reports with regard to companies in the securities market, and SEBI wants to make sure that their reports should be very true and very fair. And that's why SEBI was seeking stricter norms to take action against these fiduciaries if they are not acting in a proper due diligent manner. So these comments, they have come against this backdrop, so they are kind of reaffirming SEBI's power with regard to these auditors. And the proposed changes to the SEBI fiduciaries in the securities market regulations. So there are separate sort of regulations of SEBI which are governing the fiduciaries like these persons in the securities market, and these proposed changes are also likely to be discussed in the times to come, so that SEBI can be empowered to take more actions against these sets of fiduciaries. Now the next one is SEBI discusses introduction of common application form for FPIs. Now FPIs, I believe you all must have heard of that they are foreign portfolio investors. So in simple terms, they are foreign investors who are investing money in India, and SEBI wants to make sure that it is very easy for these kinds of persons to introduce money in India, to invest money in India. And with this particular purpose in mind, SEBI is likely to consider a proposal to introduce a common application form for foreign investors to enter into the domestic capital market. So now it is going to be very easier for them to come to the Indian capital market, and they would have to face lesser number of compliances. Further, the SEBI is also deliberating on a proposal on doing away with the requirement. Now this requirement is with regard to keeping 1% security deposit for public issuance of debt securities. So earlier this was this requirement which is there, and SEBI wants to make sure that this requirement is done away with. So this is going to boost the Indian capital market. This move is expected to greatly enhance the operational flexibility and the ease of access to Indian capital market. So the FPIs, they can access the Indian capital market in more easier way if this kind of a move is implemented. Now if you look at the present regime, now currently FPIs have to file a separate form to register themselves with the market regulator. So currently they have to separately register with SEBI. Further, this is not just one form. They have to approach the bank for opening a bank account. So again, different numbers of forms have to be filed. They have to approach the income tax department for obtaining PAN or permanent account number. And further, they have to approach the market intermediaries, depositories, and depository participants for opening a Demat or dematerialized account. So they have to approach different sets of securities, they have to approach different sets of regulators, and they have to follow different kinds of compliances. Now in this regard, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, in his 2017-18 budget speech, had said that a common application form for FPIs should be devised with a view to enhancing operational flexibility and ease of access to Indian capital markets. So SEBI is now considering that work should be done in this direction so that the FPIs, it becomes easier for them to come to Indian capital market. Now let's move to the next one. BSE gets SEBI approval to launch futures contract in gold and silver. So this we have already discussed in our previous video, that how BSE and NSE, they are going to enter into the commodity market space. So BSE has got the SEBI approval to launch the futures contract in gold and silver. Now trading of these contracts will be launched in October 2018, and the trading session is going to be from Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 11:30/11:55 p.m. So this is going to be the trading time, and these are not something which you must delve deep into. These are some of the broad things which you just need to take a glance at, and the BSE will be launching delivery based contracts in gold, which will be of 1 kg, and silver will be of 30 kg. And a delivery center of gold and silver futures contract will be exchange designated vaults at Ahmedabad. So this is that the delivery is going to be taking place from the vaults at Ahmedabad initially, and then they are going to expand in the entire Indian region. So broadly, you have to keep in mind that BSE and NSE, they are coming into the futures contract with regard to commodities, especially gold and silver. So this is which you must keep in mind. Next is SEBI allows credit rating agencies to undertake research activities. Now, credit rating agencies, we are all aware that they are giving their rankings with regard to different sets of securities which are coming into the market. Now, SEBI has permitted these sets of agencies that they can also undertake research activities which is incidental to rating. So if they are rating certain set of industries in the economy, they can also conduct some research activities with regard to them, and they can conduct their research with regard to economy, industries and companies. So they have been now allowed to expand their area of working, and now they will be doing research also. Further, some changes have been made with regard to the norms related to reviewing of ratings on the request of the issuers. So there are some changes which have been made with regard to review of rating. So if the rating has been issued, now these will be reviewed, and the cases of the request by the issuer for the review of the ratings, they are to be analyzed by a committee which is to be constituted in the credit rating agency. So if such kinds of requests are coming, they have to be analyzed by a committee, and then the action will have to be taken. And this circular we have already discussed in a separate video, so I'm right now not going into much detail. So you guys are requested to cover this particular circular, which we have separately uploaded on the portal. Earlier, a credit rating agency was only allowed to undertake the rating of financial instruments which were prescribed under the guidelines for the financial sector regulators by the SEBI, but now their area is widened. So this is something which you must keep in mind with regard to this news item. Now the next one is foreign companies get SEBI nod to hedge in the commodity derivatives. So SEBI has recently decided to allow the foreign companies having exposure in the Indian commodity market to hedge their position in derivatives. So foreign companies, they have been given this approval by SEBI that they can come to Indian commodity derivative market, but it has been on a restricted path. The restriction is there that they can hedge only in commodity derivatives. They cannot speculate, they can only hedge. So this decision was taken after consultation with the Ministry of Finance and RBI, and there have been certain sets of restrictions also which have been imposed with regard to this notification, and there will be a separate set of category for eligible foreign entities. So this will be a new kind of category which is going to be constituted, and they are going to participate in the commodity derivatives market. And the required net worth for them to hedge in the commodity derivatives will be $5 lakh. So this is the minimum net worth required, and they are going to be separate set of eligible foreign entities which are going to get this kind of a benefit to hedge in the commodity derivatives. Now let's learn more about this news. Now the derivative trading will not be permitted in the commodities you don't have exposure in. So foreign companies, you can only do derivative trading in the commodities in which you have exposure. So you can only hedge, you cannot speculate. You can hedge because you are already having exposure to that commodity, and that's why we are allowing you to come to the Indian commodity derivatives space. Otherwise, if you want to come to India to speculate, you are not allowed. Foreign entities that don't have exposure in the India's physical market, they will not be allowed. So this is important. Also, they will not be allowed to hedge their exposure in sensitive commodities. So again, a restriction. Sensitive commodities, you cannot come to hedge your exposures even. So SEBI has identified certain sensitive commodities based on the fact that these commodities, they face regular interventions by the various agencies, such as changes in import-export norms, stock limits, and those in which the market manipulation has been noticed over the past few years. So some set of norms have been prescribed with regard to identification of sensitive commodities, and we need not go into much detail with regard to these kinds of norms. We just need to keep in mind that the sensitive commodities, they have been kept out of the ambit of this hedging. And for example, the sugar and pulses futures, they are ruled out for the foreign firms because they are sensitive commodities. Next is no settlement for willful defaulter or a fugitive economic offender, says SEBI. So if you remember, we have already discussed in one of the previous videos about the settlement mechanism of SEBI. So SEBI has recently decided that they are not going to settle any proceedings which are against a willful defaulter or a fugitive economic offender or someone who has defaulted in payment of any fees due or penalty imposed under the securities law. So this is something which has been announced by SEBI in order to restrict the applicability of the settlement provisions with regard to those persons who are willful defaulters or fugitive economic offenders, or those persons who have defaulted in payment of any fees due or penalty imposed under the security law. Further, the proceedings would not be settled if the alleged default has market-wide impact, loss to investors, or it is affecting the integrity of market. So in nutshell, the scope of the settlement provisions, it has been narrowed or restricted. Now the market regulated, it is SEBI, it had earlier constituted a high-level committee under the chairmanship of Justice A.R. Dave to review its existing settlement mechanism, and these sets of norms have been announced with regard to this particular committee. Now we have already discussed about the settlement rules and the SEBI Act 1992 read with the settlement regulations, envisaged as a mechanism for settlement of specific violations without admitting guilt. So it says that you do not need to admit that you have committed something wrong. You just have to settle down and you have to comply with the terms of the SEBI. So SEBI Settlement Proceedings Regulations 2018, which are the latest one, they provides for settling proceedings by issuing an order that can include monetary as well as non-monetary terms. So this is something which we have to remember, that as per the latest regulations which have been issued recently, the terms can be monetary as well as non-monetary. Now if you talk about the willful defaulter or the fugitive economic offenders, now willful defaulter is one that has not paid the loan back despite the ability to repay it. Now if you have to repay 50 crores to bank, but you are not repaying that, instead of having 60 crores in your own pocket. So this is what you are doing is willful default. A fugitive economic offender is a person against whom an arrest warrant has been issued in respect of an economic offense, and that person has left India. So you issue a warrant against some person and that person leaves India to avoid criminal prosecution, or that person refuses to return to India to face the criminal prosecution. That is going to be a fugitive economic offender. So let's face it that they do not even deserve being part of the settlement regulations, and that's why SEBI has restricted the scope of these settlement regulations with regard to willful defaulters and fugitive economic offenders. Next is from October 2nd, unlisted companies to issue new shares in Demat form. Now the company's prospectus and allotment of securities rules 2014, they have been amended by the ministry in this regard, and the unlisted companies, they have to compulsorily issue the new shares in Demat form. So this is what we have to remember, that it is talking about unlisted public companies. The listed companies, they were already issuing Demat form. So the change have been with regard to unlisted public companies, and this is going to be effective from October the 2nd, and this change has been made to curb the illicit fund flows. Now every unlisted company which is making an offer for issue of securities, or it is undertaking buyback of securities, or it is issuing bonus, that is free of cost shares, or it is coming up with a rights offer, that is it is issuing the securities to its original shareholders at a concessional rate. So all these, they are going to be required to be comply with certain requirements as per the rules provided by the company's law. Now unlisted public companies, they are expected to facilitate the dematerialization of securities in this regard. So keep in mind, October 2nd, unlisted companies shares in Demat form. Now if you talk about the issue of shares by unlisted public companies, now under the provisions of the Companies Act 2013, now this is the law which is governing the companies in the country. Now when we talk about the SEBI, we more or less restrict our ambit with regard to listed public companies. But under the Companies Act, all the companies, they are being talked about. So there can be public companies or they can be private companies. So public companies are those which are widely held companies. Their shares are being held by the general public. The people like you and me, they're holding the shares of these companies. Now these companies, they can be either listed or they can be unlisted. So if they are listed on the securities market, they are going to be listed public companies. But if they have not yet listed their securities in the stock market, then they are going to be unlisted public companies. Now further, there is another category of private companies. So private companies, they are the companies which are owned by a few categories of persons. So if I start a new company to provide you guys education, so this will be a private company, this will not be a public company. Now generally those companies having more than 200 members, they are classified as a public company. So you are needing more than 200 members if you want a public company, and they have to follow stricter kinds of corporate governance norms because they have the public who has invested the money in these kinds of a company. Now 200 members, when we talk about the shareholders. So shareholders, they are the members, and according to the ministry, elimination of risk associated with the physical certificates such as loss, theft, mutilation and fraud. So this was there. If the unlisted public companies, they were issuing the securities in non-Demat form, they were issuing in physical form, then there were certain risks which were associated with this issue, and there could be loss of physical certificates. The certificates could be lost or stolen, or they could be even mutilated. So these kind of risks, they were there, and now if they are issued in Demat form, these will be eliminated. Further, the exemption from payment of stamp duty on transfer, as well as ease in transfer and pledging of securities, they are also going to be some of the other benefits. So if you have to take a loan with regard to the securities which you are having, the shares which you are having, this is also going to be easy once you have shares in the Demat form. Next is large firms to manage a fourth of long-term funds from the bond market. So friends, if you remember this news, we have already discussed in one of the separate videos that the large firms who want to issue bonds, who want to borrow money, they must issue 1/4 of this bonds to raise their money. So SEBI has asked the listed companies which are having outstanding borrowings, outstanding loans of over rupees 100 crore, and they are good in credit rating. They have a rating of AA or more. They have to raise 25% of their incremental or additional borrowings through corporate bonds, and this is going to be made effective from 1st of April 2019. So this move is going to deepen the bond market in India. And if we analyze this move and we'll talk about the experts who have made these comments, they have said that this is going to result in incremental issuances of up to rupees 50,000 crore in 5 years with regard to bonds market. Now let's move to some of the MCQs on this particular topic we have just covered. So the first question is, which of the following committees has recently suggested that SEBI may seek direct power to intercept calls and electronic communication? Options are Narayan Murthy Committee, TK Vishwanathan Committee, Kumar Mangalam Birla Committee, or none of the above. So friends, as we have discussed that this TK Vishwanathan Committee, it was constituted and it has sought the powers for SEBI to intercept calls and electronic communication. So the answer to this question is going to be option number B. Next question. Dash is the practice of a broker or a trader stepping in front of a large order to gain an economic advantage. Options are insider trading, front running, hedging, or arbitrage. So friends, this also we have discussed that front running, this is the practice in which the brokers and the traders, they step in front of the large orders in order to make some personal economic gains. So the answer to this question is going to be option number B. Now let's move to the next question. SEBI recently decided to allow foreign companies to participate in the Indian commodity derivatives market. Which of the following is incorrect in this regard? Foreign entities that don't have exposure in India's physical market will also be allowed. Derivative trading will not be permitted in commodities they don't have exposure in. They will not be allowed to hedge their exposure in sensitive commodities. None of the above is incorrect. So this also we have discussed that foreign entities that are having the exposure in India's physical market, they will be the ones that will be allowed to hedge their exposures using the participation in the commodity derivatives market in India. So here the first statement which says that even if they don't have their exposure, they will be allowed, this will be the incorrect one. So this will be the answer. So friends, these are the answers. So friends, this was all about our discussion on the current affairs of the month of September 2018 with regard to SEBI. Thank you.